In the winter of 1942, when the war had reached its height, deep in the forests of eastern Germany near the town of Sagan, a new prisoner of war camp was established. It was officially named Stalag Luft III, a special camp for captured Allied airmen. The location was chosen carefully. Remote from cities, surrounded by thick pine forests and sandy soil, making any escape attempt almost impossible. The German Air Force Command considered it a model facility, secure, efficient, and impossible to break out of. Construction had begun in 1941. The camp's design incorporated every lesson learned from earlier facilities. It was divided into several compounds, each intended for prisoners of different nationalities: British, American, Canadian, Polish, and others. Barbed wire fences, guard towers with spotlights, patrol dogs, and regular inspections created an image of perfect control. Behind this order lay the command's firm belief that captured airmen were not ordinary soldiers. They were highly trained, technically skilled, and resourceful, precisely the kind of men most likely to attempt escape. For that reason, special countermeasures were built into the camp's design. The ground between barracks was covered with fine sand so that footprints would be easily visible. Every building was raised slightly on stilts to prevent tunneling. To the German guards, it seemed nothing had been overlooked. The first prisoners arrived in the spring of 1942. Among them were officers of the Royal Air Force, American pilots shot down over Europe, and airmen from the Commonwealth. Despite the ongoing war, the camp operated under the general principles of the Geneva Convention. Prisoners received basic food rations, were allowed correspondence with families, and had access to small libraries and sports fields. On the surface, life in the camp appeared orderly and humane. Yet beneath this order lay something the guards could not control: the prisoners' unbroken determination to regain their freedom. From the first months, escape attempts began. Some men tried to tunnel, others attempted to hide in supply trucks or disguise themselves, but the results were poor. The sandy soil collapsed easily, and the pale color of the earth made it impossible to hide the displaced sand. Every failed attempt led to tighter security and more searches. Still, among the prisoners, the idea of a large-scale escape began to take shape. They realized that small individual efforts achieved nothing, but a coordinated collective plan could have a real impact. Such an operation, if successful, could confuse the enemy, draw resources away from the front, and become a symbol of defiance. Gradually, an underground network began to form. It operated quietly, hidden beneath the routines of daily life, but its goal was clear: to break free. Life inside Stalag Luft III followed a rigid routine: morning roll calls, inspections, maintenance work, meals, and evening curfews. To the guards, the prisoners seemed compliant, resigned to their fate. But in reality, under the monotony of camp life, a secret effort was underway. Men trained to fly, to calculate, and to solve problems now used those same skills to plan their escape. Pilots, engineers, and technicians each contributed their expertise. Some drew blueprints, others built ventilation systems, and some forged identification papers. What began as isolated efforts slowly evolved into an organized operation. A small hut in the southern compound became the unofficial headquarters for those committed to the cause. To the German authorities, Stalag Luft III appeared to be under perfect control. The camp commandant, an officer of the Luftwaffe, reported to his superiors that discipline among the prisoners was exemplary and that escape attempts were minimal. In truth, this calm was an illusion, the result of careful secrecy and coordination. Beneath the surface, a complex network of tunnels was already being designed. Every tool, every handful of sand, every wooden board carried its own purpose. As months passed, the camp's population grew. By 1943, thousands of Allied airmen were held behind its fences. They were bound not only by captivity, but by a shared belief that the war was not over, that duty continued even behind barbed wire. The camp had become a kind of front line without weapons, where patience, ingenuity, and courage were the tools of resistance. Among the prisoners circulated a quiet saying, "If this camp cannot be escaped from, then it must be studied until it reveals its weakness." That simple thought became the starting point of what would soon be known as one of the most daring and legendary escape operations of the Second World War, the Great Escape from Stalag Luft III. By the summer of 1943, the idea of a mass escape from Stalag Luft III was no longer a dream. It had become a carefully planned, highly organized project hidden beneath layers of sand, secrecy, and ingenuity. For the prisoners, the camp had transformed from a prison into a vast engineering challenge that demanded precision, patience, and absolute trust. The plan was born among a group of British officers, engineers, and airmen who understood that escape from such a camp could only succeed through cooperation. Their goal was not merely to regain freedom, but to strike at the enemy's sense of control. Every escape would drain resources, force investigations, and draw attention away from the front. The operation was meant to be a blow to the system itself, a statement of defiance carried out with discipline and intelligence. In the southern compound of the camp, behind a row of unremarkable huts, there stood a small wooden shed. The prisoners had quietly converted it into a workshop. It became the birthplace of one of the most ambitious escape efforts of the war. The decision was made to dig 3 tunnels simultaneously, named Tom, Dick, and Harry. The names were chosen for simplicity, but behind them lay strategy. If one tunnel was discovered, the others could continue. The work began under conditions of constant risk. Each tunnel entrance was hidden beneath floors, stoves, or workbenches chosen with mathematical precision. The sandy soil presented the greatest challenge. Without proper support, the tunnels would collapse easily. To reinforce them, the men used wooden beams stolen piece by piece from their bunks and furniture. Every missing plank had to be accounted for. Even a single suspicion could bring an investigation. For lighting, the prisoners built makeshift lamps fueled by fat skimmed from their food rations. Air was pumped through improvised ventilation systems made from tin cans and scrap metal. Removing the sand became a science in itself. A special role was given to penguins, men who wore pouches under their trousers to discreetly carry sand from the tunnels. During daily walks, they would slowly release the sand through hidden openings, scattering it along camp paths. It was a task requiring calm nerves and perfect timing. By autumn 1943, the tunneling operation had evolved into a miniature underground industry. Dozens of men were involved. Some dug, others reinforced the walls, while others handled ventilation, lighting, or the creation of false documents. Every man had a role. Every movement was calculated. Beneath the surface, a quiet army labored day and night, driven not by orders, but by the shared hope of freedom. Above ground, life appeared normal. Sports competitions, theater plays, even small concerts continued as usual. These diversions were intentional, part of an elaborate deception. To the German guards, the prisoners appeared disciplined and cooperative, busy filling their days with harmless activities. But under their feet, the real work continued, a secret project as complex as any wartime operation. Security was everything. The prisoners developed a sophisticated alert system. Ferrets, as they called the watchers, were stationed near key areas to monitor the guards' movements. If a German soldier approached a tunnel site, a coded signal, a knock, or a tug on a string was sent underground. Instantly, the diggers would freeze, extinguish their lamps, and wait in silence until the danger passed. The tunnels advanced slowly but steadily, sometimes only a few inches a day. The air underground was thick with dust and heat, the light dim and flickering. Men worked lying flat, pushing small carts filled with sand. The risk of collapse was constant, yet no one complained. Every inch gained, was a victory. Every handful of earth removed was a step closer to freedom. By early autumn, the tunnel called Tom had reached nearly 40 meters. But in September 1943, it was discovered by chance during a routine inspection. The Germans sealed the tunnel and tightened security. For many, it was a bitter blow, but not defeat. The other two tunnels, Dick and Harry, remained hidden. Work shifted entirely to them, now carried out with even greater secrecy. Soon, Dick was converted into a storage tunnel for tools, documents, and sand. The main effort focused on Harry, which became the flagship project. Its entrance was hidden beneath the stove in one of the huts. From there, the tunnel descended deep into the ground and extended beyond the barbed wire toward the edge of the forest. By now, the camp had developed a kind of underground society. There were craftsmen, artists, and mechanics. Some forged official-looking papers, others tailored civilian clothes. Compasses were built from razor blades and melted tin, while maps were drawn by memory based on the pilot's flight routes. It was a self-contained world, small, disciplined, and utterly dedicated to one purpose. The work continued for nearly a year. Every day brought danger, but also determination. The prisoners knew that escaping Stalag Luft III was not simply about reaching freedom. It was a matter of principle, a test of will and intellect. They were fighting a different kind of war, one fought with patience instead of weapons. By February 1944, the tunnel Harry was complete. It stretched over 100 meters, running deep beneath the fences and emerging in the woods outside the camp perimeter. It had lighting, ventilation, reinforced walls, and a small cart system for moving men and supplies. Every detail had been calculated. All that remained was to choose the night when history would be made, the night of the Great Escape. On the evening of the 24th of March 1944, Stalag Luft III looked calm and ordinary. Snow still lay between the barracks, reflecting the weak light of guard towers. The air was cold and dry. The prisoners moved quietly through routine motions, reading, writing letters, preparing for night roll call. Nothing suggested that one of the most ambitious escape operations of the Second World War was about to unfold beneath the surface. By then, Tunnel Harry had been completed and thoroughly tested. The men had rehearsed every stage. Everything from timing to the order of departure had been planned with military precision. Over 600 prisoners had participated in the preparations, but only 200 were chosen to attempt the escape. The limited capacity of the tunnel meant that only a fraction could actually go. The rest would serve as support, guards, signalers, and coordinators. The operation was scheduled to begin after darkness. The entrance to Harry was hidden under the stove in Hut 104. As night fell, the first men quietly lifted the stove and slipped below. The entrance was sealed again from above to erase any trace. Beneath the hut, a narrow shaft descended several meters. Before opening into the main tunnel, a dimly lit corridor supported by stolen timber and lit by flickering lamps, powered by improvised wiring. The atmosphere underground was heavy and suffocating. The air pumps rattled softly, pushing oxygen through narrow tin pipes. Men lay flat, waiting for their turn to crawl forward. Each had a small bag with food, forged papers, and a map. They moved in silence, communicating only through touch and pre-arranged signals. The first to reach the end of the tunnel discovered a problem. When Harry was planned, its estimated exit point was supposed to lie beyond the tree line, but during months of digging, calculations had shifted. The exit was still within the open ground, several meters short of the woods. If they emerged now, they could be seen from the guard towers. For a moment, everything hung in balance. The men decided to adapt. Using improvised tools, they carefully extended the tunnel by several more meters. It took nearly an hour of dangerous, silent digging. Finally, the first escapee pushed through the surface. A cold rush of air filled the tunnel. Above, the night was dark, the snow-covered ground faintly visible. The forest was close enough. The escape had begun. One by one, the men crawled through the narrow passage. The process was slow and exhausting. Each man had to pull himself along using his elbows, dragging his kit behind him. It took nearly 10 minutes for each to reach the exit. Inside the hut, others waited their turn, timing the movements precisely. On the surface, those who had emerged crawled on their stomachs through the snow until they reached the shelter of the trees. The system worked efficiently at first. The guards above saw nothing unusual. Searchlights swept across the camp as always, dogs barked in the distance, and the air was still. But by midnight, the tunnel's air system began to strain under the constant use. Lamps flickered, and condensation dripped from the ceiling. The walls creaked softly. Yet the line of men continued to move, steady and disciplined. By 1 a.m., more than 30 prisoners had reached the forest. They moved in pairs or small groups, spreading out into the night, following different routes, some toward Poland, others toward Czechoslovakia, hoping to reach neutral countries. Each step away from the camp was a step toward uncertainty, but also freedom. Back in the tunnel, progress slowed. At one point, the sliding cart used to transport sand jammed, causing a delay. Then, without warning, a guard's footsteps passed unusually close to the exit. The men froze. Minutes stretched endlessly. Only after the sound receded did movement resume. As dawn approached, the situation grew critical. The line of escapees inside the tunnel stretched all the way back to the hut. Frost had hardened the ground near the exit, making it difficult for men to break through. Around 5 a.m., with over 70 people already outside, disaster struck. A guard on patrol noticed movement near the perimeter, a brief flash of light or shadow. He approached cautiously, then shouted for assistance. The alarm spread instantly. Floodlights blazed to life, sirens wailed, and gunfire echoed across the camp. The escape was discovered. Inside the hut, men still waiting in line froze as guards poured into the compound. The entrance was quickly found and sealed. The tunnel, their passage to freedom, was now a trap. Outside the wire, those who had already fled vanished into the surrounding forest, unaware that the alarm had been raised behind them. By sunrise, chaos turned into grim order. Guards counted the prisoners again and again, realizing with disbelief that more than 70 men were missing. For Stalag Luft III, the impossible had happened. A camp built to prevent escape had been breached. The Great Escape was no longer a plan. It was history. For those still at large, the real journey was just beginning. The forests, the snow, and the vast territory of wartime Europe stood between them and freedom. Behind them, the camp that had tried to hold them now stood silent, shaken, and humiliated. The night of the 24th of March 1944 would be remembered not for victory, but for the will to defy confinement, a moment when courage and precision turned a frozen night into one of the most legendary acts of escape in modern history. By sunrise, on the 25th of March 1944, the forest surrounding Stalag Luft III was alive with movement. Groups of men, exhausted, cold, and covered in frost, moved cautiously through the trees, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the camp. Behind them, the sound of sirens still echoed faintly across the snow. The Great Escape, the most ambitious breakout of the war, had entered its final phase, survival. For the 76 men who had made it out, every decision now mattered. They carried forged papers, ration packs, and a few items of clothing disguised as civilian attire. Their paths diverged quickly. Some followed railway lines, hiding by day and walking by night. Others sought refuge in barns, ditches, and forests. The escape had been planned with remarkable precision, but once outside the wire, chance became the deciding factor. Within hours, German patrols and police units began combing the surrounding countryside. Roadblocks appeared, trains were searched, and aircraft scouted the area. The alarm spread far beyond the camp. Every available resource was mobilized to recapture the fugitives. For the German command, the breach of Stalag Luft III was an embarrassment that demanded swift correction. Despite the overwhelming odds, a few men managed to make real progress. Some reached railway stations, blending briefly with crowds of civilians. Others managed to board freight trains under cover of darkness. Their destinations were as varied as their hopes: the Baltic coast, neutral Switzerland, or the occupied territories where underground networks might exist. But the winter landscape was merciless, and resources were scarce. In the following days, search efforts intensified. Snow made footprints easy to track, and reports from local civilians guided patrols. Gradually, the escapees were found in forests, in small towns, at train depots. Most were captured without resistance. Hunger, exhaustion, and cold forced many to surrender. For each man taken, the dream of freedom faded into the reality of confinement once more. A few, however, succeeded. 3 men ultimately reached safety: 2 Norwegian pilots who escaped to Sweden, and 1 Dutch airman who made it to Gibraltar with the help of resistance networks. Their stories became symbols of hope, proof that the plan had not been in vain. For the rest, the outcome was tragic. In the weeks that followed, news spread through the camp of what had happened. The German authorities, angered by the scale of the escape, responded harshly. Though the details of retribution were not fully known to the prisoners at the time, the event cast a shadow over Stalag Luft III. The remaining captives were confined under stricter rules. Searches became routine, restrictions multiplied, and the spirit of the camp changed. The sense of quiet defiance that had once defined it gave way to somber reflection. Despite the losses, the escape left a lasting mark on both sides. For the Germans, it exposed the limits of control. Even the most secure facility could not contain determination and intellect. For the prisoners, it was proof that resistance could take many forms, that courage did not require weapons or open rebellion. It was a reminder that, even in captivity, the will to act remained unbroken. When Allied forces later liberated the region in 1945, the remains of Stalag Luft III stood as silent evidence of that defiance. The camp's fences were rusted, the guard towers abandoned, and the tunnels collapsed. Yet the story of the Great Escape had already taken root beyond its barbed wire. It became a symbol of ingenuity, unity, and the human need for freedom. In post-war years, surviving participants recalled the operation not as a failure, but as a statement, a demonstration that even in the most controlled environment, men could still think, plan, and hope. The Great Escape was not measured by the number who reached safety, but by the courage of those who dared to try. The legacy of Stalag Luft III endures as part of the history of the Second World War, a story of precision, endurance, and spirit. It reminds the world that freedom is not defined by open skies or the absence of walls, but by the resolve to seek it even when all paths seem closed. Beneath the pine forests of what was once Sagan, traces of the tunnels remain silent, dark, and undisturbed. They are not monuments of failure, but of persistence. Each handful of sand removed, each plank laid in secrecy, was a quiet act of defiance. Together, they form a testament to human resilience, a message that even behind fences and guard towers, the desire for freedom will always find a way forward.